So I'm going to talk about reports, and I'm also going to throw in some other tools that you can use to evaluate your Crossref data. I'm covering reports related to your core metadata deposits, and we've got a lot of kind of canned reports that you can use. I'm not going to go into reports for FundRef or text-certain data mining or Crossmark or Crosscheck or anything like that. We do get a lot of questions from members who want to find out something about what we have, and we have. So I'm going to tell you how to figure out what data you've deposited with us, if your DOIs are being used, and some ways to kind of preemptively flag some problems. So we'll start with figuring out what have you deposited with Crossref. For the most part, our members are aware of what you've been sending us, but it's still useful to check to make sure what we have and what you think we have line up, especially if you've been depositing with us for a long time, 14 years. And for those of you who outsource depositing DOIs to vendors or who have a lot of titles that have changed hands a lot, so we can give you multiple levels of information. We can give you everything, DOIs and metadata. We can give you just your DOIs. We can give you just a list of titles, and you can also just kind of look things up DOI by DOI, obviously. So if you want to just take a look at everything you have, we have a deposit tool we call the Deposit Harvester. So you can just harvest your own data. You can retrieve your data by prefix if you have multiple prefixes. You can retrieve it by title, or you can just do a DOI by DOI query. It's an OAI PMH API. This is a version of the API used by our metadata services subscribers, except you only have access to your data. You can retrieve the data in a few formats. Our uni XML format is as deposited for the most part. I think the only extra thing we throw in is a set by ID that is used with multiple resolution URLs. So if you pull down the data from the deposit harvester and kind of strip out some of the wrapper elements, you can actually just redeposit that. So you can, like I said, you can ask for all of your metadata, but depending on how much you have in our system, it's usually better to do a title by title query. And this is just, I know you can't read it, but some of you who manage a lot of deposits might recognize the shape as a journal article. That's a journal article XML. So that's, that's just an example of what we spit back to you. So next, I'm going to go over our depositor report. We have depositor reports for journals, books, and conference proceedings. We don't have these for other content types, unfortunately. But if you do regularly deposit another content type and you'd like us to generate this sort of report, you can always ask us. I think we're pretty good about being responsive to those kinds of requests. So these reports list all of the titles and DOIs for each publisher. The main page lists titles by publisher and the number of DOIs per title, and this page is updated weekly. It's kind of an exhaustive list of publishers, so it can take a little while to load. I think this report should probably have a established date, like you see on historic homes sometimes, because it's very old, but it's actually used a lot and it does exactly what you need it to do. So, but now that we have grown to have thousands and thousands of members, it can take a little while for this page to load. So sorry if your name starts with a further down on the alphabet. So to use this, you click on a publisher name and you'll see a list of journal titles. And then if you click on a title, you'll get a detailed report for each title. This report is actually updated dynamically. So a lot of times it's automatically. Sometimes at the longest lag I've seen is an hour. but usually it's pretty quick. So it lists the DOIs deposited for the title. It lists the owner prefix of the DOI. In our systems, DOIs are owned by a prefix, so if a title changes hands, the DOI for the title changes hands as well. The actual DOI prefix of the DOI stays the same, but the owning prefix in our system will be the new owner prefix. So if, you know, you've asked us to transfer something and you just want to double check that it's actually done, you can double check here. I mean, usually if we tell you it's done, you don't need to double check, but if you're being extra thorough, you can do that. We also list the timestamp included in the most recent deposit. The timestamp is a value included in the deposits, and it needs to be incremented with every deposit. So if you don't remember what your timestamp is, you can always just look it up here. I mean, there are other ways to look it up, but that's kind of a really simple way to do it. And we also include the date the DOI was last updated. That's not something you commonly need, but if you're troubleshooting something, you can always give that a check, give that a look. So we have a few different paths to figure out what journal, book, or conference proceeding titles you have with us. We have a title list on our website. Again, this is really simple, but people use it all the time, and it seems to work pretty well. You just plug in a title or ISSN or publisher name, and you get a list. That isn't, if you're trying to retrieve a lot of titles, that's not obviously very effective. So we also have a CSV file that includes all of the journal titles in our system. Unfortunately, we only have that for journals. We don't have that for books. So if you do look up a journal using the title list, you can expand that result to see the years deposited, the volume, and the issue, and the ISSN. And if there is a title level DOI deposited for the journal, you'll see that in the list. It's a good. This is a good way to just check, kind of eyeball, to see if you've deposited a full run of a journal. If if we're missing volume 7, then if it's not here, that means it's not in our. There are no DOIs with volume 7 in our system, and you should take a look at what you've been sending us. We also have an XML list for journals only that it again lists all the journal titles. It contains the coverage range. It doesn't have a specific volume, issues, or year. It just has like 1 through 10 or 1987 through 2014 or whatever. It also lists all prefixes. It lists all prefixes associated with the title. And it also, the part highlighted and read up here is unique to this report. It lists all of the title abbreviations associated with that title in our system. These are used in query matching. When you send in a deposit, you always include an abbreviation. But the system also can sometimes add them on its own. Like, it'll look at incoming queries and matching and say, hey, that's a great abbreviation for this title, and stick it in. And usually those are pretty good. But if you have a title that's gone through a lot of changes or is fairly complicated, some of these titles can get pretty long. You might want to just take a look and see what abbreviations we have. And I should say, if I'm showing all these reports, so you can do this yourself. But if for whatever you don't want to do it yourself, you can always ask us. We're always happy to help. So we also get asked a lot, can you tell me if my vendor has updated this, or if my staff member has updated this, deposited the most recent issue? You can check these things by querying for your own DOIs, and there are a lot of ways to do that. We could do an entire section on querying, so I just linked to how to query there, so you could look it up in our help system. It's an important topic, but beyond the scope of what I'm talking about. A very good way to kind of eyeball what we have is to use the Crossref metadata search interface at search.crossref.org. You can just enter in unformatted strings of metadata and get back results. It also supports faceted browsing. You can enter a journal title or SSN and get a list of results for that title. This is, obviously like it's like a web page, so there is an API for this as well, but if you're looking for something very specific, it's great. It's a great way to just see like how the title and the author, and just make sure they're all in the right order and everything. We also have a REST API at api.crossref.org that has a lot of functions that can be used to browse through your metadata, and it has data for fundref and text and data mining as well. So you've gone through the trouble of registering your DOIs and making sure your metadata is sound, but does anyone care? Beyond my cat. So the most popular of all of our reports is the resolution report. This report pulls some general data about resolutions from your DOIs. We get resolution logs from CNRI every month. And if they're late in delivering us the logs, we get like 1 million emails from people asking for their resolution reports. So most people find them useful. We do our best to filter out crawlers from these results, but it's kind of an ongoing struggle because people are investing a lot of effort into crawling us, so or crawling your sites. So it's like whack-a-mole. As soon as you identify one, another one pops up. So we do the best we can. We give you the overall resolutions for your prefix, but the overall number, plus the overall number of resolutions for all members, and we also list the previous 12-month numbers as well, so you can see if you're going up or down. We also list information about resolution successes versus failures. A DOI resolution fails if someone tries to resolve a DOI with your prefix and it fails to resolve, that meaning the DOI has not been registered. We also tell you the unique DOIs attempted. This can be interesting. In this example, it's kind of small, but this publisher had like almost 58,000 total resolutions. They had 22,000 unique DOIs attempted. I've kind of like messed. This isn't. I'm not actually revealing the publisher information like Chuck likes to do. But, so I've kind of messed around with it a little bit to hide the identity of this publisher. We also tell you what your top 10 DOIs are and how many times they've been resolved. There's some other important information. I'll get to that in a second. So another thing you might want to check figure out is how do you spot problems. You deposit a DOI with us, it resolves, everything's great, yeah? But what if it's not the DOI is deposited, or if it's deposited with some metadata? I mean, it'll link, but beyond that, it's not very useful. So one of the most heinous of DOI crimes is publishing DOIs without depositing them. So if you register a DOI with decent metadata, that's not great, but at least the DOIs will resolve. So there's a few ways to confirm that your DOIs are registered beyond just trying to resolve them. I'm also going to cover some stuff dealing with problematic metadata. So going back to the resolution report, it contains a failure rate. The failure rate is the percentage of your DOI resolutions that are not successful. We also include the overall failure rate for all publishers, so you can compare. Historically, that rate is around 3%, 2 or 3% for all the publishers. In this example, it's a little higher. This publisher's failure rate is 6%, which is not great. I've seen worse, but it's not a good thing. That means there's probably something going on. So how do you figure out what's going on? We include with the resolution report a list of every single DOI with your prefix that someone has tried to resolve without registration. So keep in mind that these are resolution statistics for an entire month. If you publish or test DOIs at the beginning of the month and they aren't deposited until the end of the month, those failures will appear on this report. So if you had some kind of delay and you know what happened, just because the DOIs are appearing on this report, you don't really need to do anything once you've made sure that the DOIs are registered and it's not an ongoing lag in your workflow. So some of the DOIs in this report are obviously user error. Here's an example. It's just like two DOI strings linked together with some URL encoding in between. This is probably like a cut and paste mistake or a bad link that someone created. Here's another example. This looks like an incomplete DOI, and there's only one resolution attempt. So unless there's a lot of that sort of thing in your report, you can just ignore it. But this looks like a legitimate DOI, and there were 127 resolution attempts, which is a decent amount for this publisher's overall resolution. So the publisher should take a look and make sure that this is a legitimate DOI. And if it make sure that it's a legitimate DOI, make sure, and if it is a legitimate DOI, make sure that it's registered. If it's not registered, they should register it. And if it is not a legitimate DOI, maybe just do a little legwork to figure out if this is something you need to worry about. A lot of times the only thing you can do is plug a DOI into Google and see what comes up. But that can sometimes reveal some interesting stuff. So I'm going to move on to the DOI error report. This report is emailed as needed to the technical contact we have on file, so it's important to keep your contacts up to date. These alerts are compiled from complaints about unresolving DOIs submitted to us by end user. So if someone tries to resolve a DOI that has not been registered, they get this form, and then they can fill out the information and their email address if they want. They don't always. So when the DOI has been registered, if we have their email address, we'll send them an alert. So you don't really need to do anything other than register DOIs that have not been registered. You don't necessarily need to communicate with the user unless you want to. And we pass all the information in this alert to publishers. I should mention that we do hold on to these reports in a database. So if you've been getting a lot of these, or if you've seen these emails and you haven't been paying attention to them, you can contact support at crossref.org and say you want to see all of this, and I can send you a CSV file with all of the reported errors for your prefix. We also have something called the schematron report. Schematron is a validation language. It lets us kind of dig a little further into the metadata that's supplied in deposits than like a regular XML validation can. These reports are used to identify messy metadata. We need to be flexible and accommodate variances in data, so our deposit schema can't keep all of the questionable data without blocking good data as well. So we do a post-deposit review of metadata and pick out items that we think might be incorrect. These are sent out on Saturday, and we only send out an average of 45 reports a week. That's a really tiny amount, considering we have thousands of members, but it's actually really effective. Members are very responsive when they get a schematron alert. And we've been running this for maybe 6, 7 years, and the types of problems caught by schematron haven't really changed over the years. It seems like we get a new batch of publishers every now and then, and they get caught in the schematron filter, and then they mend their ways. Or sometimes it's someone will change a template and it'll start throwing in dashes, or as you can see there, the biggest problem we have is junior in the surname. That kind of we ask that you just send in the surname, no junior, no senior, no anything else. But that's, I think, by far the largest transgression. Other punctuation in the surname's another big one, and then just putting in stuff in the edition and issue and volume elements that's not actually related to the number We don't need anything descriptive like volume 1. We just need the 1. So we also have something called a field report. We use this internally. It doesn't get much attention from publishers. It's kind of buried in the website. It's accessed from the Depositor Report. It gives you an overview of the metadata fields commonly used for journal deposits. We call this the missing metadata report, even though the official name is field report. We primarily use it to identify metadata that is potentially missing. So to use this, you just select the green triangle next to a publisher name, and you'll pull up a list of all journal or book or conference proceeding titles for that publisher. This is less effective for books and conference proceedings because the metadata this is really just targeted towards journals, but we still give you the results for books and conference proceedings. So it includes the key categories of journal citation metadata, volume, issue, page, whether there's no author, if there's only one author, if there's no article title, no first name, the first name initial only. The red boxes indicate that a large number of missing or inadequate metadata is in a field. But we're aware that in some fields, single authors are the norm, and lots of journals don't have a page number. So obviously, these fields are not going to be populated in every journal. So our report that's bleeding red doesn't necessarily indicate bad metadata, but a lot of times it does. So we probably send out alerts about this sort of thing if there is a way to consistently target problems, but there's just enough, just enough margin for error that we don't want to bug you about something that's not a problem. This is a really good report, again, to reference if you're working with vendors and you want to make sure they're sending us everything. And there is an additional level of detail. If you click on a title, you'll get a list of all the DOIs with flagged problems, and then like a little code that tells you what the problems are for that individual DOI. So here is a very long list of all of the reports. I think I've talked about most of them, just for posterity. And are there any questions? Yes?
You showed the bad DOI list.
Mm-hmm.
You can see what the stream was. Do you have the referrer, who it was that created that link that was broken? Do you get that information?
Sometimes we do. I think that John, the programmer who does the resolution logs, told me it only shows up like they can only capture it like 20% of the time. So we don't send that out because we don't have it reliably. But I should mention for the resolution report, there are some additional levels of reports we can run. So if something does come up, we can give you a list of like the top IPs that have been accessing your content. So we can give you some more information to help you troubleshoot. Yes?
With the DOIM report that's based on prefix,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes where we've had taken over certain DOIs from that prefix, we're still getting prefix error reports for content that we don't own.
Yeah.
Is there any way that those sort of reports can be done on ownership of the DOI rather than on the prefix?
Well, the problem with that error report is that those are DOIs that don't exist that we're aware of, so we can only go by what the actual prefix in the DOI is. We don't have any metadata associated with it. So yeah, that's a question that comes up, and I know it can be frustrating. We haven't have a solution to that problem yet. Any other questions? Yeah.
In the schematron report, the example of bad data, the name, where you get a name and then in brackets and also known as surname. Is there a preferred way of providing that data?
Not at the moment. We have plans to allow alternate names to be deposited. I think we've got so many other things going on. That's been a little sidelined, but I think we're aware that's kind of a limitation. So.